Welcome everybody to Hearts Academic Skills weekly webinar number 8. It is December 2025. People are starting to put their Christmas trees up. There are lights everywhere. The end of term is in sight, but I imagine that also means that lots of students have deadlines and assessments coming up. I'll try to get everything done in 1 hour. There is a Menti that you can access via the chat and via the code, which should be visible on screen at the moment. If you go to menti.com, what we're going to look at today is we're going to look at some elements of critical thinking, and then we're going to try to apply some of that critical thinking to some data, and we will try to do a little bit of writing to communicate like what we see in some data. So please do join the Menti and participate if and when you can. My first question for you is, I think, a really simple question, but a really important one too. I'm going to show you a picture and I'm going to ask you, what do you notice about this image and what do you wonder about it? So I'll show you the image first and then I'll move on to another slide with the question so you can type. So you can just take some time to look at this image and think about what it might be, what you notice. Now, when I ask you the question, what do you notice? You can notice absolutely anything and there are no wrong answers here. So you just might notice, I don't know, something about some shapes or some colors, anything that you notice at all. Feel free to tell me anything. My second question is, what do you wonder? And you can answer that question by saying like, I wonder if, or I wonder whether, but you can also just like write a question. So yeah, this image, what do you notice about this image and what do you wonder about it? So if you're following on the Menti, you will see the full color image on your screen. If you're just watching via Teams, you'll see that we've lost a little bit of the color. But anything at all, what do you notice and what do you wonder? Beautiful colors. Could be anything about what you think this might be. Maybe you know what it is, but it's an image of something. What is it? What do you notice about it? What do you wonder? What questions might you have? And we've got 17 people in the Teams call, but only 9 on the Menti. So if you've just joined, please do use the link to the Menti. We've got garden flowers. I noticed this as a picture of flowers in a garden, and I believe it's a portrait. I notice how different colours blend together to become something beautiful. I wonder if they are flowers. Oh, really interesting. Tulips garden. Amazing. Mass spectrometry. An image of a garden upside down. If you typed in mass spectrometry, could you let me know what that means, please? Because I think spec is something about color, and I think trigonometry might be about like photography or images of color. I don't know about mass, so please do tell me what that might mean. I think it's an image under electron microscopy. Really interesting. I'm just going to go just so that you can see it in full color if you're watching on Teams. Lovely. Okay, is there any more answers? Image from fluorescent microscopy. Yeah, I think this is a special picture for the biologists in the call. I'm not an expert in this, but just to let you know, this is a photograph from the Science Photo Library, and it is not a garden, and these are not flowers. This is hippocampus brain tissue. So it's a light micrograph of a sagittal, that's a side view section, through the hippocampus of the brain, showing the nerve cells within it. The hippocampus is a structure of the limbic system of the brain. There is a hippocampus in each cerebral hemisphere, and they are thought to be responsible for spatial awareness and the formation of memories. Okay, so really important starting point. I like if we ever have classes together in person, I like to kind of start classes in this way. I love these two questions: what do you notice, and what do you wonder? And I think is in the UK, we talk a lot about critical thinking, but we don't often do a great job of defining what it is. I think these two questions are a really good starting point for thinking critically. What we notice is just about like what we can observe and what we see, and what we can recognize. What we wonder is how we take what we've noticed and start to ask questions or make connections. And I think this is the beginning of critical thinking. If any of you attended the pre-arrival webinar that I ran back in, I don't know, the beginning of September, I talked a little bit about the definition of critical thinking and about critical thinking isn't about criticizing things and finding faults in things. It's actually a lot more complicated than that. But in some ways, I think quite simple. Critical thinking is about recognizing that things are connected, everything has a context, every piece of information we meet comes from somewhere, and when we make sense of it, we're kind of connecting things that we already know, and wondering about things that we might not know. So actually, it's perfectly reasonable to start with this image and think, it looks like a garden. It looks like something really familiar. It looks like grass. It looks like flowers. It looks like tulips. These are perfectly normal things to think. Oddly enough, this is an image of what's going on inside our heads right now. And yes, what it really is kind of imaging from inside the brain. Right, where do we go from that? I want to introduce you to a book. I'll just summarize a really simple idea, or maybe I hope a useful idea, from a book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, which is like 14 years old now. But let's just try something from that book. So Daniel Kahneman was a psychologist, maybe a world famous psychologist, who wrote this book, Thinking Fast and Slow. There's a question from his book, which is this. Now, intelligent women tend to marry men who are less intelligent than them, right? And that's like he's presenting that as a fact, and I won't give too much away, but he can kind of prove it, right? But he's not. This is not a claim. He's presenting as a fact that intelligent women tend to marry men who are less intelligent than them. Why do you think this might be the case? And I'll leave that open to you. You can say anything you like. Intelligent women are more likely to marry less intelligent men. Why? Just a reminder that this is a safe space, and whatever you post here will be anonymous, but please do show respect to anyone who might read this either now or in the future. If you've joined the Teams meeting but haven't joined the Menti, there's a link in the chat that you can use. Please do use that if you can, so that you can suggest an answer to this question. Really doesn't matter what your suggestion is. It's like we're just exploring this idea. If you are in Teams and you can only use one window and so you can't open the Menti, feel free to just post an answer directly into the chat, and I can add it to the Menti directly. So we've got intelligent women often marry less intelligent men due to social norms, career timing, and limited pools of equally intelligent partners. Yeah, it's when you're an intelligent woman, it's difficult to find an intelligent man, right? Good answer. We've got intelligent people like to be able to look down on others. Well, I'm going to assume that everyone in this call is intelligent, so we'll have to ask ourselves whether we like to look down on others or not. Smart women marrying less smart men. Easy. She wants someone who won't argue about quantum physics at dinner. Plus, he thinks her Excel skills are witchcraft. Okay. For peace at home, and also these men treat the women with respect and appreciation. I like that. These men being like less intelligent men. Obviously, any men in this webinar, we're all very intelligent, but we don't know what these men might be like. Okay, lovely. Now, I think intelligent people think twice when they do anything. Okay. What happens with this question? I think what Daniel Kahneman would say about this question is that it kind of triggers a way of thinking that is perfectly kind of like normal and human, but it kind of prevents us from seeing a perhaps less interesting answer. Okay, so we have this statement about intelligent women being more likely to marry less intelligent men, and I think we immediately start looking for a story. And we want a story about an intelligent woman who marries a less intelligent man. And then we start to think about reasons why they might do that. And then we start to make generalizations. And we start to say things like, well, intelligent women are like this, or not so intelligent men are like this. So we start to kind of make some generalizations. So like the idea that less intelligent men treat women with respect and appreciation, or that intelligent people tend to dominate not less intelligent people. What's that? Intelligent women can rule over less intelligent men to keep their autonomy. Okay, so actually we maybe start to build a story about men and women and relationships, and like maybe being bossy or being passive and subservient. But actually, the key is in the statement like more likely and the word less, right? And what Daniel Kahneman says, going back to Daniel Kahneman in Thinking Fast and Slow, he says actually the reason for this is quite boring. And basically, if you gave everyone an intelligence score from 0 to 100, then if your intelligence score is like 75 or higher, it's just a matter of chance that the person that, there's just less likelihood that the person that you meet and fall in love with is of a higher intelligence score than you. So it's just a kind of matter of statistics and probability, according to Kahneman, right? But he says that questions like this are interesting because they trigger a kind of thinking. We're kind of looking for a story. We're looking for a kind of a human relationship angle, when actually there's a data angle, there's a number, there's a statistics angle. And I'll give you another couple of questions that help to explain this. So have a look at this woman's face and just tell me in the Menti, how does this woman feel? If you're not in the Menti, but you can see the face and you want to write something in the chat, please do. If you're in the Teams chat, but you haven't joined the Menti, there's a link there, or you can go to menti.com and type in the number that's on the screen. You know what? On my computer at the moment, I can't actually see that number, but it ends 6591617. I don't know what the first number is because I've got a Teams message over it. Angry, agitated, angered. All words beginning with A. Lovely. Empowered, grumpy. Okay. Empowered. Scolding someone. And so on and so on. Frustrated. Yes. Okay. And possibly if you're walking down the street and you looked up and you saw someone with this facial expression, you probably might think twice before starting a kind of friendly conversation with them. If you wanted to ask someone the time, you might choose someone with a face that didn't look frustrated, grumpy, angry, possibly exhausted, maybe exasperated. Okay. Here's another question. What's 17 times 24? There you go. Immediate answer is don't know. 408. Is that right? Two people have said 408, so I'm going to trust you. I think that's right, yeah? 240 plus 7 times 24. Yeah, that looks about right. Now, mathematical question, thank you. Daniel Kahneman presents these two questions as examples of two kind of systems of thinking. And maybe you noticed this, maybe you didn't. Maybe you're so good at maths that you were able to see these two questions as quite similar. But Daniel Kahneman's book is called Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. And he says that our first question is an example of, look, someone's our first question here, how does the woman feel? Our answer to it is an example of thinking fast, because actually, as humans, we need to be able to respond to certain cues very quickly. So if we're in a conversation with someone, if we're in a personal situation with another person, especially if we're in a relationship with them, we need to be able to tell we need to be able to judge quite quickly how they're feeling, and also are they going to be a threat to us? I need to know whether this person's going to attack me or offer me offer me some chocolate. She's more likely to attack me, right? And usually we can answer this question correctly very quickly because it just happens very, very quickly. However, when you see the question, oh, wow. When you see the question 17 times 24, now some of you will be maths geniuses who have got a method for working that out very, very quickly. See, 3 of you gave the correct answer, 1 of you very quickly indeed. Someone's given me working, that's brilliant, thank you very much. But I think for a lot of people, the first response is just, well, I don't know. Or the first response is, I'm going to have to work this out. which we see here, right? This isn't like just an immediate answer. This is, okay, I'm going to have to take some time to think slowly and maybe break down some different stages of thinking in order to answer that question, right? So hopefully you see that like those were two different types of thinking, which is what Daniel Kahneman suggests. One, we can think really quickly and rely on our instinct, and in another, we need to give it a bit more thought. And sometimes that means we just switch off and say, oh, I can't do that. Daniel Kahneman did some studies back in the day that actually showed, you could see in someone's pupils that you could look into their eyes and see, the extent to which they were engaging with a question like this, and how actually the different types of thinking can be kind of like seen in someone's facial expression. Okay, so we're gonna take these ideas of like thinking fast and thinking slowly, thinking fast and thinking slow, and apply them to a couple of other scenarios, right? Now, which of these statements have you seen before? Right, there's not a trick question, by the way. So I've got two statements, and I'm just curious to know, have you seen either of these statements before? If you've seen both of them, you can select both of them. If you've seen neither of them, then please do select neither. So the first statement is, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And the other statement is, weak people revenge, strong people forgive, intelligent people ignore. Have you seen any of those statements before? Quite a lot of people saying that they've kind of seen both of them before. A couple of people joining in via the chat as well. Thank you very much. Actually, so both of these statements look fairly familiar to people. There's only one person who says they've never seen either of them. Slightly more people have seen insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. I think that was the same for me when I kind of prepared these slides. I knew that first statement, but I didn't know the second. Okay, and which one do you agree with? Again, you can agree with both of them or you can agree with neither. So we've got slightly more agreement with the middle statement. I'm not going to ask you to write anything about this, but I would like you to think about, like, why do you agree with this statement? And that's a really tricky question, but I think it's really important to think about, why do we think the things that we think? Or if we feel like we know this to be true, why do we know? Like, how do we know? What's our evidence of this? And again, you can just think slowly to yourself over this. But we will have a tendency with many things in life to think quickly and go with our instinct. And in some cases, our instinct is absolutely to be relied upon. But sometimes we want to kind of check ourselves, and particularly with things like academic assessments, particularly if you're in the first semester of a course, you might feel like you're an expert on certain topics because you studied them before. But I think it's really important to remember that the last time you studied a particular topic, you will have been younger and you might have been studying at a different level. I think sometimes we make assumptions that we know more about a subject than we really do. There you go. That was just an experiment, really, to find out which of these you had seen before and which ones you agreed with. I do have another question, which is, which of the statements comes from Einstein? Which of these things did Einstein say? People less sure. I don't. I hope I haven't put you off from answering, because I said you have to think slowly about stuff. But yeah, not so quick to answer this one, right? But at least one person thinks that Einstein said weak people revenge, strong people forgive, and intelligent people ignore. But most people are just not even answering these questions. Go on, have a guess. Have a guess at which of these statements comes from Einstein. It's either one of them, both of them, or neither of them. This is anonymous, so there's no embarrassment if you answer this and you find out you're completely wrong. I'll see if I can get 2 more responses and then I'll move on to the next slide. Absolutely equal. Right. I'll wait until there's 1 more response and then we'll consider one of them to be a winner. Which of these 2 statements comes from Einstein? 2 people think it's insanity. 2 people think it's weak people revenge, and so on. 2 people think neither statement comes from Einstein. 1 more answer, please. Don't be shy. If you are in the Teams chat but you haven't gone to the Menti, please go to the Menti and put us out of our misery and just choose one of these 3 options. There you go. Right. No, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Well, I mean, if you Google these statements, or if you spend enough time on social media like I sometimes do, you'll find memes like this. Have you seen? Give me a thumbs up in the Menti if you've seen this kind of thing before. Either from a website that's about quotes, or someone just posting stuff on Instagram or Twitter, Facebook, whatever. There'll be a picture of Einstein and then a quote like this. And usually, and as far as I know, none of these statements come from Einstein. You know, like, what was, like, Einstein was a physicist. He was not Einstein's, like, his area of expertise is not insanity or things like revenge and forgiveness. But you can find this on social media. Like, you see this kind of stuff on social media all the time, right? You get like a picture of Einstein either looking a bit crazy or looking very intelligent. Then we get a quotation, and then we get the name Einstein. And if you're thinking, and the fast thinking system pretty much puts these things together and accepts it and thinks, well, Einstein's a genius. He was a genius. He knew stuff. This looks like a clever thing. I put all of this together. Yes, Einstein said that. If you take a moment to stop and think, like, you know, in what context did Einstein say or write that? Like, you know, there's kind of like no real evidence. So how would we know whether, you know, how do we know that they come from Einstein? Typically, we don't. And so, like, whenever you meet something like this, whether it's on social media or actually kind of in like academic texts, I think it's worth, in order to try to cultivate a balance between thinking fast and thinking slow, And particularly when you're doing your own writing or preparing a presentation, if you've established your position, I think it's really important to be able to ask yourself why you think what you think, or how you know what you know. So I did ask you, do you agree with the statements, or not? Like I asked you, have you seen the statements before? That's just noticing, what you're already familiar with. That you can't get that question wrong. I asked you if you agreed with the statements or not. You gave me, you told me that some you agreed with, some you didn't. And there's a reason why you might think that. So like, weak people revenge, strong people forgive, intelligent people ignore. I mean, I look at that and I think, yeah, I remember when I was a kid in the 1980s, that we pretty much had a civil war in this country, and we had lots of things going on in Northern Ireland, where it just seemed like an endless cycle of violence where nothing ever improved, and it all seemed to be based on revenge. And I'm not saying that the people involved were in any way weak, but it certainly wasn't kind of like leading to any kind of strength or peace to keep seeking revenge. So yeah, I think I would bring in that kind of personal experience to justify agreement with that statement, and that would be why I think it might be a good point. But as to the question of how I know that Einstein said it, or how I know it to be true, well, I think actually I don't. I think I don't have any evidence of this. It's just people putting ideas in front of me. Okay. And I don't know, this is a kind of little pet hate of mine. I see this kind of thing on social media all the time around kind of like political arguments, where the writer George Orwell is referred to. And there'll be a quote like this: "War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength." And if you Google that, you will see those words do come from George Orwell, but they come from a novel. So people might see things like this and think it's smart because it's come from an author, but it's not necessarily the position of the writer. It's from fiction. So context is really important, not just why we think what we think, how we know what we know, but when we think information, when we've taken information from a particular place, the critical thinker considers the context in which it appeared. So if you see a quote from a writer of fiction, well, the context of what is being quoted might be a work of fiction, and we can't take that to be the position of the author. Right. So we've done a couple of exercises there around words, because I think that's kind of a way into what we're going to do next. We're now going to think about some data. All right, here's an example of some data. Map of the world, countries coloured in different colours. Just have a look at this now. Maybe have a look at your country of birth or your home country and have a look at what colour it is. Consider what colour, what other countries are the same kind of colour. Yeah, and let's go back to that basic question. What do you notice and what do you wonder? So again, anything here that you notice, and then anything you wonder. Any guesses you might want to give about like what this means, what the colors might mean? Any questions you kind of want to ask? But let's start with what you notice. What do you notice about this image as a representation of some data? If you want to start by just saying something like, well, I noticed that my home country, the UK, is kind of dark green. I'll move it this way so that you can see the colours of it. Now let's go back. So we've got a question here about like what might the USA and Indonesia seem to be the same colour, but what might they have in common? Looks like there are some countries kind of like across the middle of Africa, similar colour to that. Anything else you notice about this map and the colours within it? I noticed that there are a continent here with different colour codes. My country is coded light green. Lovely, thank you. I wonder. I'm wondering what country that is because light green. Would that be Pakistan? Would it be France? Mexico? I think Kazakhstan. Feel free to guess. Feel free to guess what it might mean as well. What might the different colours represent? Meadow green. What a beautiful way of describing the colour. My country, along with some others, are colour blue. I wonder how they've been grouped. Yeah, if you think about what your country has in common with those other coloured countries, that might be a way of thinking about this. If you're looking at this in Menti, you can see the original image and you can click on it and see all the colours again. Anything you wonder, I've given an example there. I wonder why South America is quite uniform. Like most of those countries in South America are kind of similar. You look at the other continents, they're a bit more mixed. If you want to add any, I wonder why, please do. I noticed 3 colours in various shades used for several countries. I wonder they could be for climatic changes. Nice suggestion. Okay, I'm going to share a version of this map with a key so that you can see what it's about. And it's this. This comes from a website called World Population Review, and it may or may not surprise you, but these are considered to be, well, by this survey, the most charitable countries in the world in 2025. So the first thing that you might do is look at your own country and consider whether you're surprised by this or not. So I'll go back. I'll go back a slide and give you an opportunity to add anything else you notice or wonder about this image. Have a look at maybe your country and a few others if you're interested. You can see across the top, there's a clue as to the methodology. So what we're seeing here is the World Giving Index overall score, which is calculated via the proportion of adults who helped strangers, the proportion of adults who donated money, and the proportion of adults who volunteered. And the WGI in that were kind of like, that stands for World Giving Index, or World Generosity Index. Do let me know if you've got any other things that you wonder about this. Is that surprising? Have you got any kind of questions about this data? I'll move on. You can kind of think about this to yourself. But with a map like this and with an index like this, I think the way that there's some data here, and the way the data is being presented to us is kind of like telling a story, isn't it? The data is suggesting similarities between certain countries, but the data is being put together and presented as a story about charitability. So like there's a heading there that suggests that the people showing us this data are trying to tell us that in the United States and Indonesia, and I think Kenya is that, people are more charitable than other countries based on proportion of adults who help strangers and who donate money and who volunteer. So we can kind of think fast and accept this. We can think slowly and maybe stop to think, well, how might you collect this kind of data? How reliable might this data be? And could it be explained by anything else? And there's also other ways to present the data. So here is the same data presented in a completely different format. Okay, so now we just have a map of the world and 10 points on that map. And those 10 points are the top 10 giving countries in order from Indonesia, Kenya, Singapore, Gambia, Nigeria, United States, Ukraine, Australia, UAE, and Malta. So yeah, a question for you. Does it make any difference to represent the data like this? Does it tell you a different story? I'm just interested in any thoughts you have about this. So just a few words would be great. One sentence would be great, but no more than that is needed. What difference does it make to represent the data in this way compared to our previous representation, which was like this? Sorry, let me give you the slide. Oh, that's really nice. The word accuracy. I wonder if you think this is more accurate or less accurate, and why. It would be great to, if you want to add a little bit more detail to that, it would be wonderful. Thank you. We've got in the first map, I didn't notice Singapore because it's small. And I didn't recognize Nigeria because my geography is not great. This representation highlights these countries more clearly. Yeah, difference in points. I guess you mean it is making different points. Like, maybe you can add more detail to that, or maybe someone else will. We can easily identify the location of the country with the number code used, and the data represented with the country name is more clear for anyone to read. This is more clear and precise. Lovely. Thank you so much for that answer. Yeah, by having, I think the difference, big difference here is that in this second map, we've got the names of the countries, and therefore it kind of emphasizes those specific countries. I've written a sentence here, which is this one. The first map compares all of the countries in the world, whereas this map emphasizes the top 10 countries in terms of their scores in the World Giving Index. And I think this is what I want to show you, is that when we write about data, we have to put data into words. And in previous webinars, we focused on noun phrases. And this is where, like, getting those noun phrases right really helps us to describe data while writing quite long and complex sentences. So we've got the first map, all of the countries in the world, and then the top 10 countries in terms of their scores in the World Giving Index. We really have to think about our noun phrases and get them right in order to talk, describe data precisely. So this is data just from the UK, because the world data that we see here is from 2025, and you'll see that the United Kingdom is not one of the top 10 most charitable countries. But I'm a little bit skeptical about this, because I think there are other ways that we can be generous, and so we can't necessarily measure generosity just in terms of the amount of money that we give to a charity, for example. But it always used to surprise me that the UK used to be in the top, usually in the top 5, and I always wondered if the data collection methods were a bit kind of biased towards Anglo-Saxon countries, because Anglo-Saxon countries like the UK and the USA and some Northern European countries tended to do pretty well in this survey, like about 10-15 years ago. Now you'll see the UK is not in the top 10. So I've got some data that's like just from the UK, and this is like people of proportion of people who donated and sponsored in the last 12 months. So this red line is about donations to charity, and this is about the sponsoring other people doing something for charity. So just in one sentence, please, because I know some of you have got an exam next week where you have to describe some data. So yeah, what's the story that this data tells? Can you just give me one sentence to try to summarize this data, as much detail as possible from this data in one sentence? I'm going to give you a few minutes to do that. But please do attempt it, and any attempt that you make, I'll be able to give you some feedback on what you've written. Okay, try to tell me a bit more than statistical data, because if you were to say, what story does this data tell? It's statistical. Well, that doesn't give us, there's no concrete details there. So decrease in charity donations as time increases. Okay, typically when we talk about time, we don't talk about time increasing, but we can say as time passes. Then we've got charity donations and sponsors percentage. I think you'll need to try to put that into a complete sentence. There you go, charity, donation and sponsor. None of these, like statistical data, charity, donation and sponsor, charity, donation and sponsors percentage, they don't tell me the story of the data, right? Think about it this way, that if we had, if I said to you, tell me the story of Cinderella, and you told me it's a story about a girl called Cinderella, that wouldn't give me the story of Cinderella. You'd need to tell me about what happens to that girl called Cinderella. You might even need to tell me how it ends. So number of people who donated charity, that would be number of people who donated to charity decreased, as well as the number of people who sponsored someone for charity. Okay, I think we're getting there. That's looking more like a sentence. Can we add any other details to that? I think I said that I don't think it says on the graphic that this is in the UK, but I've told you that it's the UK. Okay, I'm going to share my sentence with you. I hope I haven't made any spelling mistakes. So in order to pack as much detail in there, I think we can give some specifics of the timeline. So it's from 2016 to 2024. So one way of talking about that is it's a decade and it's the past decade. We want to say something about, a few people have tried to use the word percentage. Someone wrote the number of people. It might, I mean, number of people probably works, but we don't know if the population of the UK has changed in this period of time. So I've used proportion. You could use percentage, the proportion of people in the UK, and then I've used a really long noun phrase, the proportion of people in the UK who either donate to charity or sponsors others for charity. I think that's what captures what's in the two lines, or what the lines represent. And then I've got my verb to say what happens, has decreased significantly. And I think I can still add numbers to it as well, from 61% to 50% and from 37 to 21% respectively. So I hope you like my sentence. And what we did there was that we used a noun phrase to try to capture the main meaning. And then we put that into a sentence with a time expression and some start and end numbers to make the point. Okay. And there's, we can add to the story by looking at other data related to it. So these are the reasons. So we've seen this decline in charitability in the UK, and these are the reasons people gave for not donating to charity in the last 12 months. What do you think is the most important? What's the most important message from this data? Again, if you can give me one sentence, it doesn't need to be as long as the one I've just written. Can you give me one sentence to capture the most important message from this data? Yeah, there are different numbers, but what are those? In what ways are those numbers different, and what is that? What are those different numbers telling us? So we've got this idea that charitable donations and sponsorship have declined over the past decade. And what does this data add? It's not just that they're different numbers, but what do they tell us? Okay, it does tell us why donations declined. Can you put into a sentence what you think is the most important reason why people declined? Donations declined because 44% majority of people could not afford to give. I think that's good, although I just point out that 44% is not a majority. To be a majority, it has to be above 50%. So many people are poor in their economy, therefore the majority of the people, 44%, are unable to afford to donate. Like, this is the biggest single answer, but it's not a majority because it's still below 50%. And I think you have to say that this is survey data, so this is what people are reporting. They say they're unable to afford to donate, but do we believe them? Maybe I just, like, as a British person myself, maybe I just don't trust other British people. I shouldn't say that, should I? Here's my sentence. Almost half of the people surveyed. So rather than saying majority, I've said kind of less than half. Almost half of the people surveyed reported that they did not give to charity because they could not afford it. A lack of knowledge about or support for charities were also given as reasons. So I wanted to capture other themes there. And so I think this links back to in previous webinars from this semester, if you've attended them, if you've watched them, if you can remember them, we've looked for kind of like themes in reading. So like you might do some reading into a topic and then you identify 3 themes which kind of connect multiple different ideas. So in one of the earlier webinars, we looked at arguments for and against making cycle helmets compulsory by law for cyclists, and whether it would be a good idea or not to introduce a law to make it compulsory. And we ended up we looked at some different academic texts on this, and we identified some connections between the points made in those texts. So they included things like safety and protection, as well as risk, and kind of like the public health benefits versus individual risks and individual protections. And what we did there was we just try to make connections between the texts. And if we think about data in the same way, we're just doing the same thing, but we're doing it on a smaller scale, because we can see all these numbers, but what connections can we see between them? In the same way, when we looked at the map of the world, we could have noticed that, there was kind of like North America generally seemed to be darker than South America. There seemed to be a kind of like no consistent spread of the darkest coloured countries in terms of their like charitability. But look, we are applying pretty much the same principles to number data as we did to academic texts, and we're trying to write in the same way. We're trying to be precise but concise, trying to pack as much detail as possible into individual sentences, and typically using noun phrases are the way to do this. According to People Survey here, more proportion of the people say that they cannot afford to donate, therefore the donation contributions decrease. Yeah, I think that kind of makes sense. Maybe one more as a practice before we go. Here's some data. Issue of The Economist. Yeah, I'll leave that to you. Just have a look at these two charts, and do you want to give me one sentence to explain what this data tells us? It's related to healthcare, kind of like, yeah. Think about some of the sentences that we've seen in the last two questions. So I think you could look at something like over the past decade or over the past 15 years. This is the last question I'm asking in this week's webinar, so please do try to write a sentence that describes that data in the chart. If you're looking at this on Menti, you can you can see, like, you might see it like this on your phone or on the screen. If you click on the image, you'll see that you get a large scale version of it to look at clearly. So you can close that by the X in the corner, or you press on, you select the image and you'll see an increased version of it. Or if you're watching in Teams, you can just see it on the screen now. And thank you very much to, I've got an answer in the, an answer in the chat about China's been trending. Well, I'm not sure that this is a trend. What we can see is an increase in each of the lines, but I do pay attention to the title of each one. That just tells you what it's about. So we see an increase in innovative drug development by pharmaceutical companies in China. And we see a very dramatic increase in clinical trial starts here in China. The idea that competing US, I think clearly the number of innovative drugs in development by pharmaceutical companies in the United States is still significantly more here than in China, despite this increase. And there are still more clinical trial starts in the United States than in China. I think it would be fair to say that there's like competition in that gap there, that it's become close to the USA. But you might want to focus on the fact that, I don't know, it's overtaken Europe. Or that, I think really importantly, it's kind of come from almost nothing. So innovative drugs development by pharmaceuticals in the UK increased over the past 12 years, followed by China, then the rest of the world. However, in clinical trial starts, China increased over time. Yeah, I think that's one way of looking at it. Like, you're putting these things in order, like first the United States, then China, then the rest of the world. But I think, like, this is a good statement, but it's not telling me about how China has increased quite so dramatically from close to nothing. So China was below South Korea, Japan, Europe, and the United States. When 2009, there were more clinical trial starts by companies in Europe than anywhere else in the world, and that's now below United States and Europe. So I think you could tell that story. I mean, the thing with data is you can use it to tell slightly different stories. But you have to pick out what you think is the most important message here. An alternative option here. Over the past decade, pharmaceutical companies in China have taken on a more global presence with significant increases in the development of drugs and clinical start trials. So that's a way of like summarizing both of these statements. Fantastic. Well, it's 5:20 and people need to be able to go home. I will just move on to say that on Canvas, I'll put a link to the full Economist article that chart came from, because actually I think I say this quite regularly, that we learn to write better by reading, right? But we have to read the type of things that we want to write. So if on your degree you need to be able to write about data, then it's a good idea to kind of like read about data. So that will be in your regular readings, but if you want to also read for pleasure, then look for the stories in the news that are talking about recent developments. So the Economist article I'll link to, I'll put into the Canvas site. And when I email you every week, I always put a link to that Canvas site. So any takeaways today? I hope you will bear in mind that critical thinking starts with like wondering about the things that we've noticed, that you might find it helpful to think about those thinking fast and thinking slow. Sometimes you're such an expert on a topic that you can come to conclusions very quickly and trust your intuition. but it's also really good to stop yourself sometimes and really ask yourself, why do I think what I think? How do I know what I know? When we're working with this applies like to words and pictures as well as to numbers and data. Why do I think this about this data? How do I know this about this data? How do I know where this that I can trust this data? And then when we discuss data, actually we take the same approach as when we're writing about our reading. We start by thinking about the main message that we want to communicate. What are the stories that the data tells us, and how can we connect? What are the themes within the data? How can we connect them, and how can we communicate them? And typically, what we did is we tried to capture a theme and tell the story of the data. We tried to find connections between the data that was presented to us. So actually, I think although today we've been looking at numbers and graphics, it's no different to when we were looking at words in previous webinars. That's my suggestion. We need different language to do it, and we get that specific language from reading the things that we need to, reading the types of text that we need to be able to produce in our writing and our assessments. So thank you very much for attending this webinar, or if you've been watching a recording, thank you very much for making it through to the end. We only have one webinar left in the final webinar of the semester because it's the end of the semester. I'll use the webinar to do a session on reflecting. So we'll reflect on learning through the semester, and I'll introduce a couple of ideas on reflective writing. If you don't have reflective writing as part of your assessment on your degree program, I can assure you that in your future careers, you'll need to write reflectively very regularly, at least every year when you have an appraisal. So that's what we'll do in the final webinar, webinar number 9. But please do use the Microsoft form, not only to confirm that you've watched and attended, but to make any comments or requests or ask any questions. There's a question in the chat about availability of academic skills consultations during vacation time. So what we do in vacation time, so that will be, sorry, I'm just checking my calendar. So the week beginning the 15th of December is, so the last week of teaching at Hertfordshire for most courses is the week beginning the 9th of December. That's next week. So for most academic staff, they won't do any teaching after the 12th of December, which is good for me because after the 12th of December, shortly after the 12th of December, I become older. But between the 15th of December and the 5th of January, we will have a kind of, not every day because there's some national holidays where nobody will be working, but in Hearts Academic Skills, we'll offer a kind of online consultation service. So it's one-to-one, but there'll be a link available and there'll be a member of my team who's just online on Teams and able to talk to anyone who logs in. So it's not in person, but there will be people available each day, and we will publish the timetable for that on the Hearts Academic Skills Canvas site. I'll share it in the next webinar as well, but my wonderful colleague Tim is just putting that together right now. Okay, thank you very much everyone for attending, and hopefully see you in the in webinar number 9. Take care. Bye-bye.